President Trump returned to Washington from the G20 summit earlier this morning after postponing a news conference out of respect for the Bush family.
Before leaving Argentina, the president reaching a deal with China's leader to hold off on new tariffs set for January. ABC News Chief White House correspondent John Karl is in Buenos Aires, where the summit just wrapped up. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Eva. Well, there are no details on what exactly the Chinese have promised to do, but it does appear that the two leaders have reached an understanding that will avert an escalation of the trade war, at least for now.
On the brink of an all-out trade war, President Trump and Chinese President Xi reached a truce in their escalating fight over tariffs.
The relationship is very special, the relationship that I have with President Xi. And I think that is going to be a very primary reason why we'll probably ending up getting something that will be good for China and good for the United States.
The White House called the dinner between Trump and Xi, quote, an amazing and productive meeting, as Trump agreed to hold off on tough new tariffs and China made an unspecified promise to buy more American goods. The death of President George H.W. Bush hanging over it all. Trump announcing at the dinner he's sending his presidential plane to bring Bush's casket to Washington.
We'll be sending Air Force One, which is a special tribute that he deserves very much, and it's my honor.
Shortly after word of Bush's death, the president abruptly called off his planned solo press conference, tweeting, "I was very much looking forward to having a press conference just prior to leaving Argentina because we have had such great success. We will wait until after the funeral." The president says the decision was made out of respect for the Bush family, a gesture that follows more than 2 years of relentless attacks. But calling off the press conference also allowed the president to avoid questions about his former personal lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, who we learned this week has spent 70 hours sharing information with special counsel Robert Mueller.
Mr. Cohen, how are you feeling?
Considering his cooperation, Cohen late Friday asked a federal judge to spare him prison time for his crimes, which include campaign finance violations and lying to Congress.
With government funding running out this week, the president had been threatening a shutdown if he doesn't get money for his border wall with Mexico. But speaking to reporters overnight aboard Air Force One, the president said that he is open to a 2-week extension to government funding, temporary extension that would avert a shutdown fight while Washington is remembering and celebrating the life of George H.W. Bush. Dan?
John Karl reporting in from Argentina. John, thank you. Let's bring in our chief anchor, George Stephanopoulos, who will be hosting This Week later this morning. George, good morning.
Good morning.
It's really interesting to hear the current president, Trump, speak in such glowing terms about the former president, George H.W. Bush. He seems to be taking a very different tack here. I mean, even though he had a prickly relationship with the Bush family, he also had a prickly relationship with the McCain family and was not so glowing when John McCain, the former senator, died.
I think there's a change on both sides here. Remember, he wasn't invited to John McCain's funeral. He has been invited to the funeral of George H.W. Bush. But I think you probably can say the president's learned a little bit from that experience. That was not a good experience for him. You're exactly right. He has not had a good relationship with the Bush family, particularly George W. and Jeb Bush has said unkind things about President Bush in the past as well, George H.W. Bush. And George H.W. Bush told his biographer he just doesn't like President Trump. He said that back in 2016. But I think this was an important moment. I remember right around the inauguration, John Karl and I were discussing the fact that George H.W. Bush didn't vote for President Trump. And I guess President Trump was watching that morning. So he called both of us up right after that and said, but wait a second, I want to read you a letter that George H.W. Bush wrote me right after the election, wishing him luck, wishing him the best as president. And I think that had an effect on President Trump, and it's clearly, in keeping with everything we know about George H.W. Bush, a lifetime letter writer, very gracious man.
He left a famous letter in the Oval Office for Bill Clinton, who had just defeated him in the presidential election. So on the show this morning, you're going to be covering Russia, of course. You're going to be talking to Roger Stone, Adam Schiff. There have been a lot of developments of late. Is there including this plea deal with Michael Cohen, the former attorney for the president, is there a sense that we're nearing or maybe in the end game here?
It feels like it. Robert Mueller has also gotten those written answers from President Trump. Didn't announce the plea deal with Michael Cohen until after that. And it appears that he is targeting one of our other guests this morning, Roger Stone, as you said, who appears to be in line for an indictment as well over his possible ties to WikiLeaks and what he said about it to Congress. We also know that there are several dozen sealed indictments in federal district court in Washington, D.C. right now, 14 filed between Labor Day and Election Day alone. We don't know that all of those are connected to Robert Mueller, but it is an unusual number that we're seeing there. So it appears that Robert Mueller is getting closer to President Trump. He's talked to all of the major players, it appears. Now, the exact timing, I think we don't know. Will we see the indictments before the end of the year? Will he wait until the new Congress comes in to file a report on President Trump? Those questions, I think, are still open, but he has been intensely working in these last several days and weeks, and I think we are at least at the beginning of the end game.
Do we have a sense of how this is all going over inside the White House and inside the mind of the president?
All you have to do is to read the president's Twitter feed. He's been relatively quiet since the death of George H.W. Bush, but before that, all during this week, as we learned about Paul Manafort's busted plea deal, as we learned about Michael Cohen's plea deal, we saw constant tweets from the president attacking Robert Mueller, the most intense yet, calling it a witch hunt again and again and again. He is very transparent when it comes to the Mueller investigation.
And in some ways, it's worked driving down the poll numbers for Robert Mueller, but as we've discussed before, I don't think Robert Mueller cares so much about his poll numbers.
He's going to let the indictments, his report, speak for itself.
George, thank you very much. Always great to see you on a Sunday morning. I want to remind everybody, George has a big show this morning. He's going to do a deep dive into the life of the former president, George H.W. Bush. George will also be speaking with James Baker and Colin Powell, both of whom served Bush Sr. Plus the latest, as we discussed, on the Russia probe with Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff and longtime Trump associate, potential indictment target Roger Stone. It's all coming up on This Week right here on ABC. George, thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.